Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, known everywhere as Nerd Numbers. And with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. We have various random NBA topics to discuss today. Jimmy Butler finding a new home, Melo being out in Houston, and the World Chess Championship, which doesn't relate to the NBA at all, unless somebody's playing and they're from the NBA. I don't think either of them was a basketball player, Carlsen or Fabiano, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, Dre, what's going on? Yeah, Woody Harrelson is there at the World Chess Championship too, apparently. But it's a great time for me to be talking and watching basketball this week. I've been cooped up indoors the last few days, not able to play myself due to air quality concerns. Our state's burning down, so...
Yeah, the state is on fire. That's...
yeah. So let's not get into that, but yeah, my cats are stuck inside, and yeah, you need to wear masks to go outside, even though I'm hundreds and hundreds of miles away, right next to the water. That's how bad these fires are. So yeah, we're gonna talk NBA today.
Right. Well, hopefully it's a welcome distraction. I hope, although I'm going to make a few Trump references. Probably that's what always happens on the show. So hopefully it doesn't depress you too much. I'm going to do a new segment or an old segment. I think we have to have done it at some point before, but I'm going to call it Last Week on Lost. The good news, Brian, we've been producing at least 2 regular columns every week, the top 5 box scores of the week.
I've been enjoying them, Dre. Thank you very much.
And then, of course, the recaps for these shows. And so we've actually got some engagement. So thank you all. So I'd like to respond to a few of those before we go on. The first one, Benji Bopper, for both something we said on the podcast last week and then something I wrote in my article, the top 5 box scores. I bashed Taurean Prince, who has been one of the worst players in the NBA this season. And the note Benji Bopper had, which is one we agree with. So I ended up agreeing with this point, and he was like, "That's very nice of you." And I went, "Well, it's really easy to get us to agree with something we have said in the past ourselves, which is, instead of calling an NBA player a bad NBA player," and this might come up in the case of Carmelo Anthony, saying, or instead of calling a bad NBA player bad at basketball, say they are a bad NBA player, because every player that makes it to the NBA is one of the best of the best of the best ever. I've noted this, many times in terms of just comparing to other things of how rare it is to get X. There have been, I think, 5,000 to 10,000 players ever in the NBA, which is such a ludicrously small number. I think a fun comparison Devin and I made back in the day in an article once, Brian, was there are more millionaires produced by the lottery than are produced by the NBA. It's like from a yearly basis. So this idea that all these NBA players are millionaires and whatever, it's like, yeah, they're an incredibly rare breed. And so I agreed at that point.
And this is Devin Dignam you're talking about, right? At Devin Dignam on Twitter, if you want to hit him up.
Back in the day, we used to do that a lot. We used to do a lot of articles together. So yeah, just that point. Taurean Prince isn't bad at basketball. He is just not as good as the competition in the NBA, which is a fair point. Because when we're
Devin was a really good player himself too, right? He might have played in college or something like that.
Or you're talking Devin? I think he did coaching, but anyway.
Oh, coaching. Okay.
So it's stay on target. Okay. Back to the podcast last week, which we got a fair bit of engagement. I'm going to try and just bang these, Brian, because there's some good comments, and I've read them ahead of time. Rebound and threes made a point that I've heard a few other people make too, which is kind of funny, which is that the 76ers and Lakers really should have gone for Kawhi. And Snotty Drippin on Twitter made a fantastic point, which is funny to me, which is, with what they traded for Jimmy Butler, do you think the 76ers could have gotten Kawhi? I think an offer of that magnitude, especially to a team like the Spurs, could have done very well. We're going to definitely discuss the Jimmy Butler trade in depth, but that's a fascinating point in hindsight. Chris Ye wanted to make sure that you said on last week's show
I did.
Zubats was his guy, and he's like, it's not his guy, and you're like, well, he can be my guy. So we'll just make sure that's clear. Chris Ye is a huge Laker fan, huge fan of the show. Zubats isn't up to being his guy yet, and I can feel that as Zubats hasn't really gotten major minutes or shown what he's got yet.
Would you like to take him in as your guy, or should he be my guy for now?
You can keep him for now.
Okay.
I'm Unaware made a great point about Saric, because on last week's show, we really bashed 2 players on the 76ers, Markelle Fultz and Dario Saric. And then, of course, this is what's interesting. Saric is gone now, so it doesn't even matter. But the point being, Saric was a slightly below average player for all of last season and is young. This season, he was playing really bad, but it's only through 10 games. And on every week's show, I'll definitely have to do a look at how the league is normalized or stabilized, Brian. But the point being, it's still really early in the season. So be careful about, throwing in the towel or calling a player the best ever after 10 games. So we have to agree with that.
I'll defend myself slightly here because I was the one bashing Saric. Yeah, his shooting will probably go up. He has been a little bit unlucky this year. But my problem is everything else, like his rebounding, his big man stats. So he's still young enough to get there, but I'm still not convinced.
Jay Gunter Brett, who's one of the big Laker fans too, had a note that that on Tyson Chandler getting signed, which we're probably going to talk a little more in depth on the Lakers, saying he liked it, but noted that there are players like Nerlens Noel who's still out there for cheap. And this is a point we routinely have. In the NBA, points, I know I said the word point a bunch now already, but points overwhelm free market value for players, and traditional big stats on their own tend to be undervalued. And so there are usually, and you have to kind of look for them to know who, but there are usually a couple of good bigs that are available for far below market value. And then what happens, unsurprisingly, is they'll get picked up, they'll do really well, then they'll get overpaid, but then there's just another one behind them that's underpaid. I think of like Joakim Noah and let's see, one of the not Lopez, crazy hair though, or it is Robin Lopez. Yeah, one of the Lopez, Robin Lopez, good Lopez brother. Those kind of players end up good. This offseason, Kenneth Reed and Nerlens Noel are good examples. So this idea in the NBA that you can usually find an in their prime productive big for under market value. I agree Nerlens Noel would have been fascinating. We still think that Tyson Chandler to the Lakers was good. There's basically a correction from Jay Brett, which is about Jack McKinney. So we talked about Jack McKinney, this coach of the Lakers that really did institute the Showtime Lakers architecture, and then was injured, and the team got passed off first to, I think, I forget the guy's name, even though I talked about him last week's show, and then, of course, finally to Pat Riley. And so
Paul Westhead is who you're talking about.
Yep. So I was going to say, that the tragedy being this is a person that could have been one of the greatest coaches ever, but their team with their plan got taken over by someone else who went on to success. The comparison we made was Jenny Busek with the Seattle Storm that finally won a title with many of the same players, possibly the same strategy. The correction I have is I had thought he was done coaching after that. He actually did continue to coach in the NBA. He went on and coached with the Pacers, but as Jay Brett noted, there were lingering effects from his head injury, so his career was cut short. But yeah, this is one of these people that you can kind of put him as the coaching equivalent of a Brandon Roy or how am I dropping his name? Grant Hill. This person that in the right circumstances, amazing career, Hall of Fame, no question, that due to injuries just never lived up to potential and it's just kind of hurt. Then Papa Carr brought this point up, and I do feel we should address it, or at least say where it's a tough issue, which is on Ibaka. There's been this rumor that Ibaka is older than he appears, and as Papa Carr notes, this is just kind of a racist trend that happens towards international.
I agree.
Both in baseball and in basketball. And, well, I'll put it up there with a lot of rhetoric that happens in the United States. There are lots of ideas of, stealing resources or whatever, or crazy immigrants or crime. And when you examine them, they don't tend to be true. And so they're older than they look. They forge their birth certificate kind of stuff. It's a fine telling story. I've not done the research on it, but it is one of these things that we notice tends to just get pointed at international players. So Ibaka's playing like he's a younger player now, and it's just one of those where I'm fine taking the point of, well, we have certainly repeated that rumor before, and there have certainly been parts of Ibaka's production that have looked weird. It's one of those things that without analysis, we can just throw in the can, stop using it in our rhetoric when we talk the NBA, because there's no place for it. And it does apply to a very specific type of player, and, the correlation of the type of player that it's applied to is almost 100% not U.S. players, and we don't like that. So we're fine letting that drop. Okay, nothing more from you on that. And then the last one, I'm going to let this tie us into our first segment, which is just for SM Past, who asked about Milwaukee. So our first segment of the show, Brian, because we've just been noticing the scripts getting bigger and bigger, and we've gone over an hour several weeks now. And I don't mind going over an hour, but I like to at least keep the show kind of contained. So what I've decided to do, at least, we'll give it a trial period for a week or two, is I'm just going to say around the NBA, I say you and I each get 3 topics we get to discuss. Any tangents that takes us off on, fine. We'll talk those, then we'll talk the big subjects we have, which, like I said, this week are Jimmy Butler, Carmelo Anthony, and the World Chess. And then so that way we don't have, 20 topics that we're going to try and talk every week and go over everything. So I'm going to use that as my first topic, which is to talk the Milwaukee Bucks. The fascinating part about the Milwaukee Bucks, I heard a bunch of people mentioning that when Jason Kidd left, that they were just going to be better. And they are now a 10-3 team that did manage to beat the Denver Nuggets the other night, which was certainly
and they
rough.
Beat the Warriors on Friday, I think it was as well. So they've beat 2 of the top 5 other teams within a few days. That's very impressive, Dre.
It's fair on the Warriors in that Draymond Green was injured, Steph Curry got into foul trouble and then left the game early injured. So it's kind of one of those. I'll give them. I'm okay being a little nicer to the Warriors than the Nuggets. The Nuggets were less banged up. But yeah, they did just.
It was in Golden State, though. Let me ask you this: where was that Denver game played? Which city?
I might have been. I think it was in Denver, actually.
Wow, at Elevate. Well, that's impressive.
Yeah, and then I had a friend of mine. I wasn't watching the game live, but I had a friend watching the game that said going into the fourth, it was a very close fourth quarter. I believe they took the lead with about 2 minutes to go. Said they're out of gas, and Denver has an amazing home court. So that was a major win. Denver's still got some stuff, but we're going to leave them off, like I said. So a few simple points about the Bucks as compared to last year to kind of explain what's going on. The 2 big reasons I say they're doing better. One is they've essentially dropped Thon Maker and Jabari Parker out of the rotation. That was huge. I think that was really key. Playing bad players just hurt your team. There are a couple teams that just depresses us. We're going to talk the Rockets later in the show. And that's the point. You see these teams with good players. And if you have Giannis and Eric Bledsoe, that's already pretty good, right? To play bad players normally in your rotation is just to give away wins. And the number of teams that just like doing that is rough. So getting rid of Thon Maker and Jabari Parker helps. The other is they're just shooting threes and they're shooting them well. So I looked this up, Brian, comparing to last year. So last year, the top player on the Bucks was Chris Middleton in terms of shooting threes. He took 5 a game, 36%. This season, Chris Middleton is up to 7.5 threes a game, 46%, followed by Brook Lopez. I love that Brook Lopez did this to me, Brian, because I just said he was past his prime. He wasn't a productive center. He was done. And it is true that Brook Lopez, as a big man, does not do any of the things you really need a big man to do. He doesn't really rebound on that well. But he's shooting a bunch of threes, and that's really valuable. So he's shooting.
Yeah, just quickly on that, Dre, before you move on. He's getting a lot of credit, I want to say, for breaking. He's going to break the record for most threes made by a 7-footer, and he's shooting, for almost 42%. That is very impressive, but like you said, look at how stacked everyone is because of their defense, Dre. Almost everyone on the Bucks has huge win-producing numbers because there's this number 1 defense in the league. Brook Lopez, despite these threes, despite this ridiculous defense by the Bucks, he's just rebounding 5.8 per 48 and is, just an average player. So that's a little bit of a mirage for Brook Lopez.
He's, according to our numbers, as a 30-year-old, is average, and that's kind of huge in that he has not been a productive player in like 4 seasons and has missed major time to injury, a few of the last couple of seasons. And my thought was like, okay, he's heading into his 30s. He hasn't been productive in years. The odds that he's going to be an above average player are meh. And he is, but it's something you've brought up a lot, Brian, which I love talking, which is if you have a big that can shoot from outside but can't do the things the bigs are, you are essentially losing a big and using them as a shooting guard. And so our thinking is just get a shooting guard that can shoot 36% and get a real center like Jay Brett was noting. There were some good ones like Nerlens Noel available for nothing. So the fact that teams get enamored by, I can have this big that can shoot threes. I always come back to baseballs like the metaphors. It'd be like having a mediocre pitcher that could hit 200 and being happy because 200 is really good for a pitcher. That's fantastic. You can find a 200 hitter that you can have as your designated hitter in the American League or bat 8th or 9th. So there is still a love in the NBA, even as they're going towards efficiency and shooting of, I have this big that can shoot from outside. Isn't that amazing? And you can look at teams like the Rockets with Capella and go, I can just have a big that's really good at being a big, and then I just get a couple of perimeter players that can shoot. Melo can't shoot. That was a problem, but it is what it is. But so Brook Lopez is shooting 7 threes. Eric Bledsoe is not shooting well from 3, but is shooting 4.5 threes. Same kind of point. This is what's fascinating about the Bucks to me, looking in depth. Eric Bledsoe and Dante DiVincenzo.
I think it's DiVincenzo.
I love Basketball Reference, by the way. A+, Brian, you got it right.
Basketball lucky.
Pronunciation is it's DiVincenzo. So beautiful work. So he's not shooting well from 3, but taking a lot. Malcolm Brogdon is getting in the game, 3.5 threes, 43%. Pat Connaughton, three. And then one thing I'm happy about, at the beginning of the season, Giannis was trying to take a lot of threes. He was taking 4 a game and shooting bad. He's still bad. He's at 7.7%, but he's down to 2. But this team is taking a lot more threes, and they've removed the bad players. Last season they were a 48-win team. So that's what's good about that's what explains the jump in this team from last season. And when we were doing projections and I was going, 48 seems like a good one, because I was going, I don't know who they're going to play. I will say thus far, Mike Budenholzer is looking like a coach of the year candidate.
Oh, yeah.
And 2 simple fixes he's done seem to be, he has the team playing a modern defense and offense. So offense being the threes. Defense, we talked about this a lot, Brian, namely that Jason Kidd seemed to have them running a really complicated, hard to execute defense, but it was outdated. And so it was one of these, like, why are you having them try this really hard strategy that's ineffective? So that was that. So Budenholzer seems to be doing well. That kind of explains the jump. So I did definitely want to make the Bucks one of my topics, Brian. Let's let you get one of your topics.
Yeah. So my first topic is an article on cleaning the glass. Let's get this up here. And this is a coaching article where they interviewed Enes Kanter about offensive rebounding. And I love this because Kanter gets a lot of hate in the mainstream, but we've always liked him because of his offensive rebounding and a few other things. So it was kind of cool to see an article about that. But the reason why I'm talking about this on the show is his description of why he's successful. And let's see if I've got it highlighted still here. But I described it as basically the NBA Jam theory of rebounding. And Kanter says you have to shove your guy and just bury him under the rim and try to box him out. People always go for the ball. I go for the contact first. So that's what I did when I played NBA Jam. I just shoved everyone when they were shooting. So I guess it works in the NBA too.
I know, like, fundamental, and it could be outdated because I haven't played in forever and I only went through middle school. But yeah, you box out and you gain possession. I know you bring the ball to the power position before you do anything else, that kind of stuff. The fundamentals, I know with a lot of really good defenders, it is the right position matters so much more than anything else. Interestingly enough, what I'll give him is, in this article, Kanter comes up on the right side of what we hated, called the Kobe assist, which is Kurt Goldsberry came with this idea that Kobe Bryant was productive because he shot shots, but when he missed them, they were misses that would go to his bigs that they could put back. And again, our take was, why the fuck are you giving Kobe the credit for that and not the bigs that can let you miss shots? And that's what Kanter is saying. He's saying, I'm really good at offensive rebounding, so that's my players shoot. But that's the point. Our value is on Kanter. Kanter is the one that says, I'm going to get in position to get a good offensive rebound. That's what's valuable.
Yeah. So anyway, very, very cool coaching article on Cleaning the Glass, which is a good site.
I love it. I'm going to give one topic. This is from Patrick, and I'm calling it the All They Are Players, because he has a fun article from Tom Haberstra, which is talking about kind of the cyclical nature of greats in the NBA. Right now, Steph Curry is, before that injury, was looking great. That really is the Steph Curry thing. He was on pace to have another amazing season. And I think when all is said and done, I think Curry's already a top 10 point guard all time easily. Case for top 5 is a little rough just because of longevity. There are players that lasted a really long time, but he's an all-time great, right? He's one of only a couple multi-MVP winners, the first unanimous one ever. Although I had someone, I forget, on Twitter noted just the good point of saying you have to be careful with that distinction because there was a long period of time where votes were anonymous. So you could vote for not a player without fear of getting chastised. Now that there is transparency in who you vote for, there are people that go, did you really fucking say Donovan Mitchell was more valuable than Steph Curry? Are you off your rocker? So that, I think that did help a lot because, for instance, both I think it was Shaq and LeBron both came within 1 vote of being unanimous. And then I think MJ came within 3 votes. So I think it's possible one of them goes unanimous if there is transparency in previous years. He is an all-time great. And what Tom was talking about is that players like Charles Barkley are saying, well, all he does is shoot threes, right? This stupid myth that all Curry is a three-point shooter. As you've noted, the funny thing is that's really Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson's production is Klay Thompson's above average production in the NBA, as in the value you want to add to your team. It's pretty much 100% from his threes. Whereas Steph Curry is really good at shooting every type of shot except 10 to 16 feet in the NBA. And the only 10 to 16 feet shots he takes is about 5% of the total shots he takes in the NBA. So just on the whole, all of Steph Curry's shooting is amazing, not just three-point shooting. We've been amazed by his rebounding because he's a 6'0" guy with Tyrannosaurus Rex arms is what I call him. Steph Curry really is an anomaly in the NBA because he is an undersized point guard, which is just, that's baffling. Even Michael Jordan was a 6'6", essentially small forward playing the shooting guard position with, point guard ball handle. And I'm sure he had long arms. Like Charles Barkley was also 6'6", but I think he had like a ridiculously long wingspan. So most players athletically, at least in terms of looking at body type, you're like, oh, they have really long arms or are really tall or whatever. Steph Curry doesn't look like a basketball player, if we're honest with ourselves, but he is amazing at basketball. He can rebound. His assist to turnover ratio is pretty pedestrian, but the reason it's pedestrian is because he shoots so much. He's a pretty good passer. So Steph Curry has value in so many areas that you call him just a three-point shooter, or all Steph Curry is a three-point shooter, is ridiculous. And the reason I like this article from Tom that Patrick brought to our attention is this same stupid rhetoric was used against Michael Jordan back in the day. He said all he does is dunk, and that wasn't true. Michael Jordan, remember.
And Larry Bird said it in the article, right, Dre? He said Dominique Wilkins and Michael Jordan are just dunkers. Magic is the best player. And we might sort of agree with that, but it's still funny to hear it coming from Larry Bird, right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous when a player is really, really good at one thing. And that's what I'm saying. I'm calling that the all they are player trope, which comes up a lot in the NBA, which I don't agree with. But there's two problems with it. One, even if that's true, if Steph Curry is putting up the production numbers that he is, just shooting threes, that's still valuable. That would be like saying all this pitcher does is throw strikeouts. Their walk rate is abysmal. They can't hit. All they do is throw strikeouts. You go, so what? That's valuable? So that's one. And two, it's just untrue. And so we've noticed this trend over the years when there are players like Michael Jordan, like Steph Curry, that kind of break the traditional mindset mold of what an MVP is. People just try and denigrate them, saying all they do is blah. And, the same kind of thing. I remember in the movie Love and Basketball when they're, having a talk about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, person says all he does is park his lane in the post and, shoot the ball from up close. Shaq, all he does is dunk. This one isn't true, and even if it is true, it's still valuable. So I did like that Patrick brought that up and wanted to give a shout out. Okay, Brian, topic 2 for you.
Yeah, so this was going around a lot today on NBA Twitter. Let's bring this up here. My personal NBA Top 50 web app was released by Nylon Calculus on Fansided today. I saw Ian Levy and Crumpled Jumper, a.k.a. Todd Whitehead, posting about it, so they were probably both involved. It's pretty fun. We were criticizing it a little bit, but what it looks like is they're just trying to give you anything, you'd want to do. There's points per game here. I could emphasize that. There's, playoff win shares. So there's these different sliders that you can put in here, emphasize the 1940s, and then it gives you these cool animated, top 50 lists. So it's fun, and it has really good graphics. Yeah, that came out today.
I mean, pretty much this has summed up a lot of what my curmudgeonly attitude about the analytics movement has been, is like A+ for your graphics, D for your analytics. And so the point I had on this my personal top 50, because like you said, you have different sliders of things you care about, and then based on how much you care, it makes a list for you. The underlying metric of choice is win shares, which I definitely find fascinating from Nylon Calculus, which has made a bunch of amazingly horrible metrics like Dre, Dredge, etc. So it's interesting to use win shares. And then the other things they have are rings, which is number of championships, points per game, shooting efficiency, and then various eras. But what I'll point out is kind of interesting about using both win shares with basically championships and points per game is the win shares metric was tuned by Dean Oliver to kind of favor that kind of thing. Win shares has baked into it that if you are on a winning squad, you get a boost, irrespective of nothing. And that essentially ends up in the defensive win share part of that equation. It's really huge that defensive win share is really a team adjustment. I get tickled pink over this in it's funny but not funny way, and that for years and years and years, the wins produced got bashed as having a team adjustment factor. And what the wins produced formula has is opposing shooting efficiency is part of the regression, because the way a regression works is you have to say all else being equal. So when I'm looking at how important a point per game is, I have to say how important on its own is a made 2-point basket if I'm equal on rebounds. If both teams rebound the same, how important is an additional 2? If both teams have the same number of steals, how much more is an additional free throw worth? That kind of thing. And so it is important. You have to, and so when you say all else being equal, you have to include all of those other parts. So shooting efficiency and opposing shooting efficiency is included in the equation. And then you can have discussions about how we give the credit for that, because the wins produced just says divide by per minute and give it that way. And there are very simple improvements that we could make to that already that we haven't. You can call us lazy or whatever. And there are possibly smarter ones, but that being there matters. Now, so people noticed that and said, well, you just have a team adjustment. You're cheating. Whereas the win shares metric essentially has a team adjustment in the defensive win share. And the nice trick they did is they just said, this is factoring in defense, and shook their hand. BPM does the same kind of crap. So it's one of those where I get a little amused where I go, well, you're just basically giving a bonus to being on a good team. So that's what win shares does. And additionally, win shares, like mini metrics, because it was hand tuned, favors offense. It likes offense more, and that's because the person who made the metric said, I think offense matters. So you already have win shares that already is going to look at essentially offense and wins as big deals. And then on the right side, where these other things you can tune, which are rings and buckets, they're the same factors. The metaphor I was giving you pre-show, Brian, is, first off, spoiler warning for Infinity War. The Avengers Infinity War, if you haven't seen it, I don't really care about spoiling, and I'm shocked that you've gone this long without seeing it. But spoiler for you regardless. In that, Thanos destroys half of the universe for a stupid reason. Doesn't make any sense. Don't try and justify it. It doesn't. So Thanos destroys the population of half of the universe using the Infinity Gauntlet. But his backstory is he's been going around for years to various planets and cultures and destroying half of them for his own nefarious reasons. And so on a podcast, the Crack Podcast, take a shot every time Dre mentions the Crack Podcast, Boxscore Drinking Game, take a shot. On the Crack Podcast, the guest today noted that, well, if he destroys half the people in the universe, but he's been destroying various populations in the universe for years, are those populations now a fourth? Is he double hitting them? And so I thought that was really amusing. And that's really what this tool is doing, right? You're using win shares as your core, and then you're letting people give extra bonus to rings and buckets and efficiency. And that's already built into win shares. So I think this is a really cool tool. I agree with you there, Brian. And it's just a lot of the same thing. I think it's a really fancy looking car. I don't like the engine underneath, but that's been us forever. Like I think for a very long time, we have already not liked a lot of the direction of analytics, at least the mainstream ones. And I don't see any reason that's going to change, but at least the tools are getting a lot nicer.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily the purpose of this was to be a very analytics type thing. It's more like it's something for everyone. So yeah, I pretty much agree. But, as far as Thanos goes, Dre, we'll see what happens in the movies here, because the next one's coming out, I guess, next year, right? Or whatever, at some point. But I do know that in the comics, one of the reasons why he wants to kill half the people in the universe is for romantic reasons, Dre. That Death, who is like a god or alien or something in the Marvel universe, Thanos ends up getting the hots for Death and wants to kill all these people to try to have romantic relationships. So personally, I'm rooting for that to be the reason why he does it in the second movie.
I was going to say, I do enjoy that comics, when you start telling the plot lines, just how ridiculous they are. And so I love that. Although a funny thing, Brian, I'm a little depressed about this. This is kind of a weird shout out, but not. I caught up on American Gods. I just binge watched it this weekend. It's a really good show. It was on Stars. Ian McShane, based on the book by Neil Gaiman. But similar to the Avengers, it was cut. They didn't do the whole book in one season. They're going to do it again. They were going to continue the book next season. However, the sad news is there have been a bunch of behind the scenes issues. So this amazing show that I was really looking forward to season 2 after coming out of it. It would be like finding out at the end of Avengers that all of these actors just, were all of the actors that survived, right? The ones that Thanos didn't kill. It'd be like finding that all the actors that played those characters quit, and the directors quit, and, Marvel pulled out. So that's essentially what happened with American Gods. But in the show American Gods, which is based on Norse mythology, it actually has a bunch of various gods from other cultures that are in America that are personified and doing fun stuff. At one point, one of the characters said, they're gods, they fuck with you, that's what they do. And I actually like that take, because in a lot of old schools, particularly Greek, Roman, and Norse mythology, the stories about the gods read like comic books, because they're not smart and intelligent. They're just like, oh yeah, this guy messed with this guy for no reason, for fun. That's a story. Comic books are very much the same way, where I think sometimes we try and give them more, these stories, these Marvel stories, we try and give them more not brevity, what's the word, weight than they have when you actually examine the source material. Like, yeah, these are very silly stories.
Well, let's look at it this way, the most simplest way possible, Dre. Why was, religion and belief in God, why did that come around in the first place, back in the old days of humankind? It was just to explain the universe, right? Well, these stars and planets up in the sky, those are gods, and when the earthquakes come, that's the gods being mad at you. It was just, they didn't have science, right? So they had to explain the universe somehow. So the gods do bad things to you, right? This is a way to say bad things to me that happen in real life. Maybe it's not as much my fault.
I love it. That's actually a take I wish was kind of more common, but that's a subject for another show. All right, Brian, my last topic, I'm just going to say we talked a little bit about Tyson Chandler, this idea of center by committee on the Lakers. Seems to be working out. They are finally above 500, so heck yeah, including some key clutch blocks by Tyson Chandler. But then that
was a great play.
You brought this up, that GM LeBron apparently used his savvy to convince the Phoenix Suns GM to buy him out early.
Yeah, that was reported, I think, I saw it on Bleacher Report. I don't know who reported originally. But apparently the Suns were going to hang on to Tyson Chandler to help mentor their young players until the deadline and then release him. But then apparently GM LeBron intervened and said, nope, we need Chandler now. Release him, Suns. And the Suns GM, I think, is James Jones now, who LeBron's agency represented, or he played with James Jones in Cleveland or something. So they're good buddies. He came in and did it. So good job, GM LeBron.
Well, what I was going to... I can use this to bring us into our first real topic if you want, or we can finish. Do you want to do the 1940s article as a shout out? Then we can just finish up the...
Sure, yeah, sure.
Let's jump right into Jimmy Butler on Philly.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I find this important and relates to what you were just saying about Tyson Chandler and mentoring and other... When we compare the NBA to other industries, how freaking bizarre the paternalism in the NBA is. We own your rights. We want you to play for us versus your agency. Because Tyson Chandler can wisely say, look, you've got DeAndre Ayton. He's your future. You're not going to be good again in the time frame that I'm productive in the NBA. I've got maybe who knows? Tyson Chandler, I thought he was done. I thought he was supposed to be. I thought his expiration date was 5 years ago, and he's still playing. So
he's 37 or something like that. He's been around.
Yeah, at best, he's got 2-3 seasons left, and that's the ideal scenario. I'm not useful to your squad anymore. You're not making the playoffs this year. I could help out another team this season, and I would like to. I would prefer to end my career playing on a playoff team where I'm in a useful role than being a backup on a team that does not need me and has already replaced me with a player that is working out great. DeAndre Ayton looks fantastic. That in normal industry tends to work out pretty well unless there's some major pettiness. We've seen like the Hollywood industry, the entertainment industry, we've noticed pettiness like this, but most industries you just say, you give your 2 weeks and you go find another job, and usually there are no hard feelings. And even with the rise of like non-competes, a lot if you're powerful enough to take it to court, most court cases will say non-competes aren't enforceable. So
there's been a backlash against that lately, especially here in Northern California.
It's fascinating because I think it's becoming more common, and it reminds me a lot of patent trolling. So if you're a company that has competes and you're mad at someone, you can wave it at them, and if they don't have the power to fight you, you kind of win. And that's kind of the idea patent trolls do, which is it's more effective for you to just buy us out than to keep fighting. But if you fight them, they lose. And I think the same tends to be true. A lot of the research I've done on things like non-competes does say most courts will say no, that's an unrealistic expectation for the contract they signed. But who knows? But so the point being, the NBA is this weird place where you have players that are restricted on what they can do and what they're allowed to do. And that's ridiculous, because I saw some backlash about like the BS that LeBron did this. And you kind of go, shouldn't a center that maybe has, I'd say Tyson Chandler maybe has 2,000 to 3,000 minutes left in him. That's ideal scenario. And is it bullshit for him to want to use those productively? And the fact that it possibly took one of the biggest players in the NBA with the most sway to make that happen, that's weird. That is a weird thing. That's not normal. Now, bringing it to Jimmy Butler, I actually got a little bit of flack from Hardwood Paroxysm this week, which is kind of odd, because I said...
This is Matt Moore writes, CBS.com writer, or yeah.
I believe so. I think it might not have been him, actually. It might have been someone with an account like him, but I thought it was him. But I was talking about Jimmy Butler, and I said, Jimmy Butler's fiasco in Minnesota might show that it's a suboptimal system to force players to play where they don't want to. And I got a lot of backlash from it, a lot of classical stuff, a lot of the exact same thing we were saying about Ibaka. On its surface, it may not seem racist, but when you dig into it, it seems to only get applied to black athletes.
At best, it's paternalism, right? At best.
Because I got a lot of people saying he wasn't forced. He signed a contract. Why is he? I love this back and forth that one person had where someone said he was like a coddled, whiny millionaire that just, was, just coddled his whole life. And someone came back and said, like, Jimmy Butler was homeless and poor and living in like assisted living housing until he made the NBA. Now he's rich. It's like, you can, this idea that he's a pampered rich person when for 80% of his life, because he's still a young guy, right? Jimmy Butler's a millennial. For 80% of his life, didn't have a good life, and then has had a good life recently. To call them coddled, it's hilarious when you do look. Anybody who's raised in like the top 5% of the United States has had a much more coddled life than Jimmy Butler. So that definitely gets amusing. But this idea that players like Jimmy Butler have a say in what they're doing is wrong. And the reason it stuck with me about Jimmy Butler is if we examine the path that took Jimmy Butler to where he is now, the Wolves. Jimmy Butler was drafted with the number 30 pick in the NBA draft. Now, what's funny about that pick is we argue it is the most advantageous pick for general managers or NBA teams. Reason being, if you are picked in the first round of the NBA, that is where most of the money is, but it's at the top. If you're picked top 3, you get a great contract. But they go down and down and down, and you're not allowed to negotiate. That's the annoying part. The NBA draft sets your salary based on where you are picked in the draft, which is bullshit. Because, for instance, Greg Oden and Kevin Durant back in the day, everybody knew they were going 1-2. And I've heard Arturo's brought up that if Boston had gotten the number 1 pick, they were going to pick Durant. Arguably, Portland should have picked Durant. Jeff Ma, their analytics expert at the time, said pick Durant. So this weirdness of Durant and Oden, it was a difference of $4 million when their contracts were said and done based on getting picked number 1 versus number 2. And we fall for the logical fallacy of, well, that's, 20 million versus 16 million. They're so close. But what you can really go is say, that's 4 million. That's a ton of money. So the draft does that, which is bullshit to begin with. So Jimmy Butler was drafted number 30, which because at the very bottom, it's the lowest contract. And then first round picks are more restricted. Now, second round picks pay less than first round, but after 2 years, you're allowed to essentially restructure. That's like what happened with Jeremy Lin. You can restructure.
So if you do hit that star with the late first rounder, you keep them under team control longer before you have to pay them.
You keep them under a lower contract because in both.
That's a baseball term, right? Team control. So I'm probably using that wrong.
It's not. I'd give it to you because in the NBA, the way it works is if you draft a player, you get him for 4 years. The reason a second round pick can potentially have a better contract than a first round pick is after 2 years, a second round pick can restructure their contract for more money. A first round pick cannot. So if you are a star player picked with the 30th pick in the NBA, like Jimmy Butler, at the end of 2 years, you get a marginal raise in your third year, a marginal raise in your fourth year, and then you can get a big raise in your fifth year. That's everybody in the NBA. Whereas if Jimmy Butler was picked with the 31st pick, he could have gotten a huge raise after his third season and fourth season and then gotten the same big contract going forward. So that's why we say the end of the first round is the most advantageous for teams. So Jimmy Butler was picked number 30, which is the worst, the best worst contract, worst best, however you want to phrase it. And the Bulls got his rights. The NBA, when you talk team control, they have restricted free agency, which means after Jimmy Butler's 4-year contract is up, if they give him an offer which is well below his market value, if he's worth anything at that point, they have his restricted free agency rights, which means he has 2 options. He can sign a suboptimal deal for 1 year, his 5th year, and then he's free and clear after his 5th season. or if he agrees to any contract in the NBA, so another team tries to sign Jimmy Butler. Let's say the Lakers come up, say, we'd love to sign you, Jimmy Butler, 5-year max deal. Jimmy Butler says, hell yeah. Then the Chicago Bulls are allowed to match that, and he's under Chicago control for the next 5 seasons. And that, for instance, happened back in the day to Elton Brand. Elton Brand, the Miami Heat tried to sign him away from the Clippers. The Clippers matched the contract. Elton Brand wallowed away in obscurity on the Clippers instead of helping the Miami Heat. I think it turned out okay for the Miami Heat, if I recall. But that's the contract Jimmy Butler's on now, his restricted free agency, because he signed a max deal with Chicago. But because he signed a max deal with Chicago, that meant any deal that he signed elsewhere, they were going to match. And then the only way he ends up on Minnesota is if Chicago is willing to trade him. And then even now, he doesn't have a no trade clause, which means the teams are allowed to trade him, and it's up to them. So when I was getting upset, I'm saying Jimmy Butler's been forced to play where he's played. Now, he might like them, he might not. It is not true that he has had agency over where he plays in the NBA, and that is screwed up. That really only exists in the NBA. There are a few other industries with similarities. Where doctors do their residencies is kind of similar, but even that you could kind of consider the doctor residency kind of a player's college career, and then they're free and clear to go after that. So this is the only industry where a player, no matter how good they are, is forced to play for where they're told, ostensibly for the entire average career. Like I said, Will Koo, I bring this guy up all the time, did a study that in the modern NBA, I'll have to see, I'd really love to do an update of this, Brian, but at least as recently as 3 seasons ago, the average NBA career was about 6 seasons. I just told you, if you draft a player, you get him for 4 seasons, and then you get their restricted free agency, which adds up to 5 years. Usually the compromise you can kind of do, this happened back in the day with Melo, is you're a star player, you can usually get the team to agree to a 3-year deal pretty easily, like 3-year with a 4th year being a player option. Even that's 7 years. So if you're drafted, your career is basically owned by the team that drafted you, and you had no control over that. And what's even worse, typically, if you're a good player, your fate is in the hands of suboptimal teams. And that's messed up, and I don't like it. So when we were talking about Jimmy Butler a few weeks ago, Brian, I said, no matter what you think about Jimmy Butler's attitude in the locker room or attitude outside or yelling at people or demanding a trade or whatever, I can't side with it because the draft is so messed up. So at least that's the precursor. Then I'm going to actually talk the impact of Jimmy Butler to Philly, which I think was good. But I'll let you cap that first point if you want to.
No, I agree with all that, and yeah, the NBA impact of it is the side I was going to go to. So I'll let you talk about that first. But I'll just say this is the same reason why this LeBron Tyson Chandler story I was so happy to talk about on the show today. It's just another example of the stars, taking control in the league and deciding their own destiny rather than owners or GMs. And hey, Tyson Chandler gets to play for his hometown team, the Lakers. He's from Compton, so that's an awesome way to end your career. So good job, LeBron, there. But yeah, let's go to Jimmy Butler, the player.
Yeah, and we definitely find it weird that people side on the why do these people get to do what they want. And spoiler alert, the one part political, it just goes there. I'm sorry. It does seem to come down to skin color, because there are other areas where this exact same type of attitude is not only tolerated, it's applauded. It's kind of messed up and we don't like it. And as I said, my patience, especially in the modern political atmosphere, is definitely waiting on putting up with the tiptoeing around it. I'm going to give a fuck that guy to Bernie Sanders, who tried to say people that didn't vote for a governor because they were afraid of voting for a black person aren't racist. That's the definition of racism. If you want to say their racism is justified, I'd love to hear that take. I don't agree with it, but own it. I'm so sick of this. Like, if you're going to be racist, be fucking racist. Like, just own it. You're going to have that attitude, if you're going to have that belief, own it. I'm not tiptoeing around this idea of I'm not mad at Jimmy Butler because he's black. I'm mad at Jimmy Butler because I think he's acting unacceptably. And today, as an example, this is my preemptive shout out, Brian. Stan Lee died. Rest in peace, Stan Lee. Stan Lee was known as many things, a great figurehead in modern comics history. We were just talking Avengers Infinity War. But what I will say is, he's a very common person in the modern United States in that he is a great self-promoter. We like people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Stan Lee, and these people were at the front of amazing teams that did amazing things. And a lot of people get forgotten because we really like saying Steve Jobs saved Apple, even though there were many people that helped Apple. We like saying Bill Gates with Microsoft, even though there were many people that helped out Microsoft. Same thing with Stan Lee. And these are contentious things. Jack Kirby, another huge name in Marvel Comics history, was kind of erased in many ways from big parts of Marvel history with Stan Lee. I know Steve Ditko, the co-creative Spider-Man, had to fight to get that co-creator label. So it's one of these interesting parts where when certain types of people like Stan Lee take the credit for themselves or act with huge egos, we give them credit. And then, like I said, when we see in sports when players do it, people get upset. I go, just own it. It's not the action. You are not upset with the action, because I'm going to see you say how amazing Stan Lee was. And he was. We'll give him the, it sucks so much that he's dead. It just fuck this year, Brian. So, it sucks that he didn't get to see the end of Avengers Infinity War, because, I mean, that is an amazing, from where Marvel was at in the 80s to where it is now, that's such an amazing change. So it sucks that we lost him, but, you'll applaud Stan Lee while bashing an athlete, and the actions are similar. It's something else, and just fucking own it. Okay, anyway. On actual, this is amazing for the 76ers, Brian. We love it. We are a big fan. I think the funny thing is I think we talk a lot about how you have to have narratives in the NBA, and the people that write stories have to have narratives, and the boring narratives people hate. They hate saying the Warriors are a lock to win because they're a good team. So you said Kurt Goldsberry wrote about this. Not Phil Goldsberry. I said Phil because I was reading Philly. You said Kurt Goldsberry wrote about this. I know that Kevin Pelton wrote about it, and they're both kind of trying to be dour. No, I'm going to follow the Jeff Van Gundy principle. The team with the best player wins the trade. Jimmy Butler has been a Brian Star and a Dre Star. Reminder, that's plus 10 wins for the regular season and twice as good as an average NBA player. That's an amazing thing to have happen. We have never seen a trade like this in NBA history not work out in favor of the team that got him, provided the player stays healthy. So as long as Jimmy Butler's healthy, they win. This is a great trade for them. And then, as we were noting on last week's show, Brian, Dario Saric hasn't been playing that well. So now if you give those minutes to other players, if you have Simmons, let's see, I'm actually curious. Who are they going to play? I guess they're going to do Fultz. This could be rough. But
so I was seeing Twitter speculating that Fultz is going to get benched for Butler. That's how they're going to do it.
Oh, that's huge on many fronts.
But I don't know what actually happened.
Well, and Fultz has only been 24 minutes a game. So if Fultz is benched, that's 24 minutes. If he gets an additional 12, that's huge. This team already has Simmons and Embiid, who are both great. I've got to say, I'm pleasantly surprised that Embiid is finally turning into the star that people think he is, because it's so much easier for us when someone's a mainstream star and we actually like them. I like that I don't have to argue with people that we think LeBron James is amazing or Russell. It was so much nicer when Russell Westbrook went from being overrated to being an MVP caliber player, because I could go, we agree with you. He's amazing. So the fact that Embiid is now one of the top 5 centers in the league probably is great. So if you've got Simmons, Embiid, and Butler, that is a fantastic spot to be in. They won the trade. It's just an upgrade from Covington, and Saric hasn't been playing well. So any take that doesn't say the 76ers won this trade is wrong. I do think Philadelphia helped out Minnesota a little, in that Minnesota is so terrible after their top now 2, I guess, after Karl Anthony Towns and that team's bad. Anyway, but after Karl Anthony Towns, that team isn't very good. So giving them 2 above average NBA players, if we believe Dario Saric is going to regress to his old numbers, could potentially help out that team.
Yeah, and I don't want to pick on those guys. We mentioned, we'll talk about the Goldsberry article a little later. I thought this is hard to measure. This is just my eye test on social media and whatnot. I saw very few people that had the take we do, which is that Philly just had a heist over Minnesota here, which is what seemed like it happened to me. I think people are just kind of saying, well, Jimmy Butler is a star, but he's forced to be traded, so maybe his value is a little lower. And Robert Covington is not a star, but he's really good, so maybe he's almost as good as Butler. And then if you throw in Saric, well, pretty good trade, right? But that's just not the way you measure it, right? Like, Covington's okay, but he just doesn't move the needle for me. He's not going to affect wins tremendously, whereas Butler does. And Saric, I was going back and forth with our commenters, like you were saying. Yeah, he's probably a better shooter than he's showing this season, and I think I said this already once this show. but he doesn't do anything else that you want. And he is, I think, only 25 or 24, so maybe he'll get better, but I just don't see it there. It just doesn't feel like Minnesota got anything back for one of, the top 5 players in the NBA.
We saw other stupid offers, and when I saw Houston's 4 first-round picks being touted as something of any value, I was going, give me a fucking break. The term I would like to use in both the case of Saric and in the case of the Houston Rockets 4 first-round picks is the word replaceable. Because Jimmy Butler.
That's right.
This is the Patrick Picasso principle we bring up all the time. Patrick Picasso principle, for those that don't remember, Patrick, in talking about Kevin Love, said, let's say you're going to a thrift store and you see a Picasso, you're 99% sure it's a Picasso and it's $100. So even if you're wrong, like on the flip side that you're wrong and it's a forgery or something, you're out $100, whereas if you're right, you're up millions. You see a Picasso in a thrift store and it's $100. Don't go up to the front desk person and say, can I get it for 90? Don't give them any reason to balk at you taking the Picasso. Just take the Picasso and be happy. And he was using this in reference to Kevin Love because Kevin Love said, I want a max deal. And they were like, well, what about this? And they eventually gave him a max deal, but instead of giving him the franchise max, which would have been 5 years, they gave him 4 years. And then shocker, after 3 years, he demanded out. So they lost a year of Kevin Love because they tried to haggle with Kevin Love instead of just saying, fuck it, you're one of the top 20 players in the NBA, take your money and go home. So this notion of, you can't replace certain things. That's the Patrick Picasso principle. They're worth whatever, so just pay it. And there are players in the NBA that because of the rules, because of the max salary rules the NBA has, you just can't replace a LeBron James or a Kawhi or a Jimmy Butler or a Karl Anthony Towns or an Anthony Davis or Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid, right? These players, you can't go on the free market and replace them. To your point on Dario Saric and Robert Covington, it's not that we don't think they're not worth wins. We're double negative there. It's that we believe, and I think I'm in the same boat as you, Brian, you could probably go out and find a replacement player for Robert Covington via trade, possibly via free agency, possibly even, I've been, for DFS, I've been examining players that, are called up, like the D-League call-up players or the replacement players, when a bunch of Warriors get injured, they have to call someone up to play for 2 games. And the stupid trend I keep seeing on NBA teams is they keep looking for fourth-year senior players that put up like 15 points a game on a good school. But, the Dave Barry win shares or the Dave Barry wins produced college models would say they're a below average player. And then when you look at people like Arturo that start factoring in things like age and strength of competition, go, why are you signing us? I go, why the hell do you keep signing these players that aren't really going to, like you're saying, move the needle? But there are players potentially overseas in other leagues that were really good college players that might be worth a look. We think you could replace Covington. That's what you're saying, and I agree with you. We think, not only do we think, we know you can replace 4 first-round picks trivially with just cash. A first-round pick from a playoff team is buyable in the NBA draft from like $3 to $5 million. If you want to get a draft pick in the 21 to 30 range, you can buy it outright, and the Nuggets did that with Ty Lawson. The Golden State Warriors did that 2 seasons ago with Jordan Bell. You can just buy.
He was a second rounder, but high second rounder, so your point still stands.
So what's funny, what also gets interesting too, is that the draft is inefficient. So what I'm saying is, if you have a player that you would maybe slate as out of the draft lottery, but you really want, you would take him in the late first round, but you don't have a late first round pick, you can pay for that pick, and then it can end up even better in your favor, where you pay for a second round pick and you're paying, Jordan Bell probably less than $1 million a season for his first 2 seasons to see if he works out. So that's I think where we agree, which is in this trade, it might have potentially helped out Minnesota a little, in that you have 2 players for one, and the backup player that Saric or Covington is going to replace now on the Timberwolves was, if you basically had Jimmy Butler plus player on the Wolves, that might be equal in wins to Covington plus Saric. The problem being, you could have found those players elsewhere without having to give up a Jimmy Butler. Whereas you can't go out, the Wolves are not going to be able to go out and find a replacement Jimmy Butler. So that's why we think the 76ers won the trade. They got the best player. We agree with that point.
Yeah, and I understand that the Timberwolves were up against the wall, right? They had screwed up this Butler thing for several months now. And so, maybe they had to get less value for him. It is risky as well for Philadelphia. maybe, a Bobby Portis Mirotic situation happens with Butler and, Embiid tomorrow in practice and someone's face gets broken. Like, who knows what's going to happen? But you still do this 100% of the time, 8 days a week, right? Even if it doesn't work out, you have so much value if you're Philadelphia, and it just is worth it every time. So let's just be honest about, what happened. Like, Minnesota might have screwed up. Maybe they were in a bad situation. They couldn't have done any better. But let's not say this was like a good return. It just wasn't.
It might have been one of the better deals from what we heard was out there. And that's just what's fascinating. That's the bigger point to me, is that the reason I keep Butler, or like back in the day would have kept Kevin Love, is anytime I have 1 year of a star, 1 year of Jimmy Butler, which is irreplaceable, especially if you're in the playoff hunt, I never see values back for it that seem to come anywhere close. Like I said, one of the only examples in NBA history that was even close was Charles Barkley for Jeff Hornacek and 2 replacement players. And like I said, replacement players, I follow Jeff Van Gundy. You have to take them off the board when you're analyzing that trade, because if I can replace that player easily, it's not a trade asset. But that's one of the few trades where it seemed like it mattered. And Jeff Hornacek just left in free agency for another team, so it didn't even pan out for the squad. So but to what we're saying, that's why the NBA is a messed up league, where we're having arguments about you had to trade Jimmy Butler for these other players and they got good return or whatever. And our take is this isn't normal. They lost the trade despite the fact that they had a huge advantage to keep Jimmy Butler. This is really good for the 76ers. We're just huge fans of it. And then also, I'll let this bring us into our last point, the Carmelo Anthony in Houston. A bigger point to me is you have Joel Embiid, who knows about his health. We just have to be honest about that, and Ben Simmons. So you have two top 10 players in the NBA. That's what's needed to win a title. That window is short. I really hate people that think that just because Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are young, that you've got a decade of them together. You might have 5 years if you're lucky. We've seen lots of things screw up good cores.
For me, Dre, it's like you're thinking about this season and then maybe next season, and that's about it. I wouldn't go 2 seasons into the future. You could never predict.
In professional sports, going more, the 5-year plan is bull. If someone says they have a 5-year plan, I say shut the hell up.
BS.
2-year plan. You get 2 years.
Yep, I agree.
So you don't want to waste a core. The Houston Rockets may bounce back. I think they already had a win after benching Melo, maybe. So
that sounds right. Yeah.
The Houston Rockets are 5-7, which isn't horrible, but playing Melo was just not a good thing. They played Melo for about 10 games and went well below 500. We have seen teams like the Los Angeles Clippers, like the Oklahoma City Thunder, waste an amazing core by making bad moves. So this Jimmy Butler trade with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, it's like, don't waste a season of a great player. That's another remarkable part, just hearkening back to the Milwaukee Bucks I was talking earlier, which is when you're talking about Giannis, I'm amazed at this. Giannis is still freaking young, but they have wasted 2 to 3 seasons of amazing.
Is he 23, Dre? Is that right?
Is he that? Geez, 23 years old. Let's see if he's. And let me just make sure.
He might be 24 now.
Well, the Basketball Reference does it as they say, whatever your age is as of February in the basketball season, that's the age. He's going to turn 24 this season, but he's 23 right now. They've wasted several years, but he's still freaking young. But wasting a year of a star player is almost unforgivable to me in the NBA. And so with the 76ers going, screw it, let's try and win now. And then assuming that Jimmy Butler is going to re-sign, or that they're in the best position to re-sign Jimmy Butler, I like that move. So we agree with this. By the way, in the Kirk Goldsberry article, it's interesting.
Oh yeah, let's look at this briefly.
What he uses the 2017-2018 shot charts comparing Covington versus Jimmy Butler. One reason this bugs me is just the notion that we were talking defense, that the team you are on.
Dre, can I back up a little bit before you get into that? So this Goldsberry article, the title of it is Why Jimmy Butler May Not Solve Philly's Biggest Problem. And we talked about this last week, right? Philadelphia has had good defense, but very poor offense this year. So Goldsberry is saying Butler's not going to help their offense. So go ahead.
All right. So the issue being, we've seen Jimmy Butler in the past be good at three-point shooting. He wasn't last year. But what irks me is shooting efficiency is one of the most fungible stats. We were just talking to the Milwaukee Bucks, how Budenholzer came in and said, hey, why don't you guys shoot threes instead of not shooting threes? And they did, and they've been doing amazing. So when you look at a player changing teams and you say, I think they're going to shoot the exact same as they did in their previous squad, I think that's a little foolhardy, and he's using last year's statistics. I think playing next to Embiid and Simmons Jimmy Butler's going to get a hell of a lot more open looks than he was playing next to, Andrew Wiggins and Derrick Rose. So I just, the take I'll have on that is, if you are going to go for the philosophy of team chemistry and why Jimmy Butler might not work in team chemistry, you may want to at least then start to address the fact that he's going to be playing on different squads. So I still think they easily win, and I think Jimmy Butler could be in for improvement playing next to Ben Simmons versus the point guards he was playing with in Minnesota.
Yeah, I looked at whatever numbers I could. I could not figure out how he got to the conclusion that Jimmy Butler's not good on offense. Like, he's very good on offense. He's a good shooter. I don't get it. Sorry, Kirk Goldsberry.
All right, let's just briefly talk about the World Chess Championship that's going on. It is a deadlock. It is tied 1.5 to 1.5, 3 straight draws. But the remarkable part about this World Chess Championship, for those that do know chess, is that essentially the black pieces seem to have had the edge every game. And
can I give some context to this too, Dre? This is the World Championship between Magnus Carlsen, he's Norwegian, right, and the American Fabiano Caruana. It just started, I guess, Friday and Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday, and it's going to be going all month, right? They're going to 6 or 6.5 points, so it's going to be going a few weeks more.
Yeah, and so the way chess works is it's a 12-game series, kind of, but like you said, it's essentially the first to 6.5 points. You can get half a point for a draw in chess. And so it's off to, like I said, a riveting start of 3 draws. But the reason it's remarkable, the philosophy in chess is that the white squares have the advantage, meaning that you're more likely to win with white than you are with black. And so far in this series, it seemed like whoever has had the black pieces has had the edge. And in fact, I didn't realize this, Brian. I love it. You pointed me to exactly what I wanted. 538, finally, an area that we think is fantastic. So basically, on like the 538 scale, we think like basketball statistics, the get off our lawn take is up there with other mainstream basketball statistics. I'll phrase it that way. And then they're above average at political stuff, although what gets fascinating, we're starting to observe this. I know Justin Wolfers took a shot at 538 from someone else, which is, if you look at the betting markets now for political markets, it seems to be a little better than 538, although they're all using the same. We were talking this last week. They're all using the same data, so it is the question of how good polling data is for projecting that stuff. And then you get to chess, and chess is, I think you were saying this pre-show, it's a deterministic game with no randomness, where we have computers that are so brilliant they can tell you who is winning exactly by how much. The Michael Lewis hated win probabilities for basketball games and stuff. For chess, we have these, and they're great. So you actually, 538 is fantastic because they have a graph that I really like, which is showing how close each game is. And so this is actually the kind of sport I like, because there was a point in game 1, I watched the replay, so to speak, where Magnus Carlsen, with the right rook move, could have gained essentially a bishop or knight edge heading into the end game, which between 2 grandmasters, that is amazing. And he blundered, he missed the move, and then Fabiano managed to come back for a draw. As you noted, this is the U.S. Fighting for the World Championship.
Yeah, and it's been since the early 70s, Bobby Fischer. So USA has a long drought in chess.
1972. So this is remarkable. I've heard some analysis that basically says Fabiano is not playing up to kind of his normal self. The key being, chess has, like I was saying, the very deterministic nature, ratings for every player. And it is much better than in sports because, as I've noted, you can't really use the type of rating system chess does for basketball, because there is no point where Fabiano loses to LeBron James, and then we have to ask how good he is, whereas that happens all the time in professional sports. But Fabiano and Magnus have both played hundreds, if not thousands, of rated chess games, and the difference between them is 3 points in chess rating, although Magnus Carlsen has been on a downhill slide for, I think, the last 4 or 5 years. So these two are the best 2 chess players in the world. It has been riveting, with black having the edge. I'm excited to see how it comes out. Like I said, I'm excited from an analytics guy because I can actually get the type of analysis I want. I have been a little depressed that it is not as easy. Google is not great at this. When I want to just find out what happened in the chess game or just get a recap of the chess game, it is not as easy, but it is available. That's the good news. When I say Google, I'm just more mad that it's not more mainstream like main news sites. But I think sites like Slate, definitely sites like 538, the internet chess community, if you have that, has the games on it. So I'm really enjoying this. And
Yeah, chess.com, Dre, has been broadcasting them on Twitch. So if you go to Twitch and search for chess.com on Twitch, I know that's a little convoluted, but you'll find it.
I've been loving it. And like I said, the remarkable part so far about this series is that Black has seemed to have the edge. And then I heard Yasser Seirawan talking about it today and kind of said that Fabiano has not really played like himself. So here's hoping he breaks out of that slump and we have a new U.S. champion. The one disadvantage I'll say he has is chess has implemented a new kind of world championship system, which, like I said, it's 12 game, first to 6.5 points. There, if you look up chess history, there is a long, convoluted history of how the chess championship used to be decided, which puts it up where it's boxing.
People still talk about games that are over 1,000 years old. That's how crazy chess is.
But I'll just say this, like, the chess world championship used to be very boxing based. So you're like, who does who? And as an example, this is the first time in a long while that the best two players in the world in terms of ratings are playing each other for the title. So when we get into all these arguments about, the best players playing for Major League Baseball or for basketball or for hockey, chess has been even wonkier in terms of the best players guaranteed to play each other for the title because it's been a couple decades.
So do you want me to say briefly how they do it now? So for instance, last year is a great example. So what they do is you have the number one champion, right? That's been Carlsen for quite a while now, over 5 years, I think. And what they do is they have a tournament between the 2nd through 9th place players, right? The next 8 players behind Carlsen. And whoever wins that tournament gets to play him for the title. So last year it was Karyakin, for instance, the Russian. And I think he was one of the lowest ranked people, but he won that tournament. He was like 8th when he faced Carlsen, lost to him last year. So yeah, that's the reason why it happens that way.
And the reason that's kind of a flawed system, and it almost relates to football, where football kind of has the one and done, is a lot of the top chess players are clumped, and when you put them in a tournament against each other, it can be luck of the draw.
Yeah.
For who wins. So it may not be the best system.
Like looking at postseason win shares versus regular season win shares on that top 50 site, right, Dre? It's like, go for the regular season.
And then also what I was going to, I would just do that. But what we notice a lot about championships playoffs is that it is really a fun tournament for entertainment value more than a definitive who's the best. Because if we're just doing the definitive the best, just every year you go, who has a top rating? Carlsen still has a top rating, still has a top rating, still has a top rating, still has a top rating. He has to keep playing right, because if he doesn't keep playing, then other players can overtake him. And just for perspective, what gets funny, you said quite some time, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He is currently, in terms of chess history, he's only got the 11th longest reign, and if he loses this year or next, he'll still be at 11. So some great player, for perspective, Garry Kasparov, one of the best ever. 15 years straight as a champion. Back in and Anatoly Karpov, him and Garry Kasparov had some of the great.
They were the rivals, right, in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, this was very much I'm old because I was going to say Sampras versus Agassi. But,
same era.
But to make it contemporary and more accurate, no, this is a Federer and Nadal situation. These two great players that, if one of them wasn't there, the other one gets a 30-year reign, which is remarkable. So Magnus Carlsen isn't even up there yet, but this is a great championship in that it's the first time the number one and number two have been playing each other in a while. Black seems to have the edge. The U.S. has a chance. The problem is it goes to a tiebreak, and if it goes to a tiebreak, it's blitz, and Magnus Carlsen is a much better blitz player than Fabiano. So yeah.
No, it's awesome. I know next to nothing about chess, so it's been great following this and, having people smarter than me teach me a little bit about it. And I guess I'll shout out the 538.
It is great.
Writer. Yeah, so the 538 chess writer is Oliver Roeder or Reader, Roeder. Find him on Twitter. He tweets a lot about chess.
And like I said, you pointed me the article that I wanted because I wanted to see these win probability charts, because in chess I give that actual credence. I think we were talking this last week, Brian, about how teams shouldn't give up. And for what it's worth, Boston, I think, was down 17 points to Phoenix and didn't give up and came back and won. We think that some of the win probability charts in pro sports are off because some of the assumptions might be flawed. But in chess, you have a computer that can tell you exactly the right move to make, and you can watch it, and it's much faster than humans. So I actually love chess for that perspective. So that's been a lot of fun. I think I gave my shout out, Brian. So I think we were going to talk. You had a shout out to at least this. From
Twitter, Bad Prof. I'll get into that now. So let me get the link up here. I think I lost it, but yeah, here we go. This is really cool. So, Bad Prof on Twitter at Yago Colas. He tweets a lot of basketball history type stuff. And what he tweeted a few days ago is a 1940 basketball analytics article written by E.F. Fultmer and Ted Watts from Albion College in Michigan. And it's entitled A Rating Scale of Player Performance in Basketball. Really interesting stuff. Obviously, it's not great analytics work, that far back in the day. But they talk about all the stuff that we talk about now, right? Trying to find a subjective way to measure players. There's even a sentence that I love here, which is they're trying to look for things that make for winning basketball. Winning is in italics. So, man, in some ways they're ahead of even where people are now in their thinking on basketball. But yeah, so let's get into, let's see, no, there's not enough resolution to actually show this article here. It's an image, of course. But yeah, it's things like turning the ball over, forcing tie-ups, making shots, missing shots. So they have a positive and a negative box score that they add up. And it very, very interesting stuff. So check that out if you like the history of basketball analytics. That's my shout out.
Love it. And then I said I already shouted out Stan Lee, passed away today. Rest in peace. That his impact's pretty easy. The fact that I think 30 of the top 40 movies, or I was going to try and be hyperbolic and messed up, but so many of the top grossing movies in recent history have been Marvel movies. It's remarkable. And to look at where that came from, basically him working at a publishing company in the 60s that was going bankrupt, and what he and an amazing team, I want the amazing team part, even in his obituary where, you're supposed to give praise and reverence to the person that's passed. I do think because you're talking his legacy, you have to talk the amazing people at Marvel, including people like Jack Kirby, made the modern landscape for modern pop culture, which is just remarkable. So it's a major loss and really sucks. And he was an incredible person that kept, he was still going at 95. I missed him at a convention circuit recently, which bummed me out. I think it was as recently as 5 years ago, but he was still doing conventions, still doing appearances. I think he showed up in most of the Marvel movies. I forget if he's missed any. So just worked till the day he died. An amazing presence. If you're watching this podcast, I'd be shocked if you're not a fan. So just a major loss and a huge sucky one. And like I said, an easy shout out.
Yeah, I'll just say I know a lot less about comics and Marvel than a lot of nerds in my class, so I don't have quite as much to say to you, but the one thing that was remarkable to me today, looking at people's reactions to his death, is the number of people, like even people that I knew and had met personally, that have met him personally and talked to him for an hour and had a great conversation with him. He was a man of the people, apparently, and that's pretty amazing. Despite, like you said, all the crazy stories with Kirby and Ditko and whatnot.
What gets remarkable, and I mean, this is one area I give him a ton of credit for. So, the one area where I get iffy, and I always struggle with this, being the analytics person, where we can appreciate greatness, right? We think Kobe Bryant is a great player, but where we start getting into arguments is where we think he's overrated or gets credit for things he doesn't deserve. And I think, like I said, in some cases, Stan Lee winds up there where you say, that was really Jack Kirby. That was really Steve Ditko. That was, there were a bunch of other great writers, artists at the time that we think Stan Lee is getting a credit for that he doesn't deserve. And the same thing, like I said, is true of Steve Jobs or like Michael Jordan in basketball. One thing that he did that was amazing and huge in terms of both self-promotion was fan interaction. The idea, think about San Diego Comic-Con, that's like right near you. That's one of the biggest parts of the world now. Just so many people flock to San Diego. There are huge Comic-Cons. I have C2E2 out here in Chicago, which is huge. I know Emerald City Comic-Con has gotten pretty big. I'm sure there are other. New York is huge as well. Comic conventions used to be a joke. They used to be like held in one room of a hotel room with a bunch of nerds hanging out, for nothing, right? And then also this like podcasts that have taken off in fan interaction. Stan Lee back in the day was a person who, respond to fan emails a lot. He came up with funny ideas like the No Prize, where same thing, like the comment section on Boxscore Geeks. Someone wrote something to him where they noticed a mistake in an article or not an article, a comic, and he would send them a No Prize, which was an empty envelope to thank them because it was a sarcastic response. He would tell people when they noticed a mistake, he'd say, "Thank you for noticing a mistake. You've been awarded a No Prize. Wait for it in the mail." And the people started responding and saying, "Where's my no prize?" And so he would start sending fans that noticed mistakes in his comments empty envelopes that say enclosed is your no prize. So just fantastic stuff like that. He did a lot of fan interaction, outreach stuff, promotion for comics that just help the field, which is just remarkable. So when you think about what you're saying, like podcasts and all that, and you're saying you have lots of people that met him. I didn't get to meet him at a convention. I don't feel bummed because he has been on so many television shows, so many podcasts, so many interviews that I've seen that I don't feel robbed of getting to hear Stan Lee. And that was a huge part of what he did for the comic industry, is he made himself very available to the fans, which in good ways and bad shaped a lot of modern fandom, which is just, that is remarkable. Because yeah, when I'll put it up there with, let me talk Charles Babbage in computer science. This guy invented a computer before computers existed. He wrote a blueprint for a computer that has since been built before we had computers. Stan Lee basically invented the modern, like, blogging. Maybe not invented, but, cultivated like the modern blogosphere and podcastosphere when such a thing did not exist, which is just truly remarkable. So he deserves a ton of credit for that.
Yeah, I saw someone on Twitter, maybe it was Arturo or someone like that, say basically Lee and Kirby are the most important artistic collaboration of the last 100 years, something like that. Interesting statement. Maybe it wasn't Arturo. I should research that.
I saw that, but yeah, you're right. He retweeted it, but that is
okay.
All right. Well, anyway, enough comics talk. We'll end up the show. This has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week, twitch.tv, usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Mondays, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. We also have the podcast you can find on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote, all that stuff helps us out. And if you missed the live show, you can catch the recap on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Dre Alvarez. You can find me everywhere as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find everywhere as Boxscore Brian. And with us, as always, in spirit, Patrick Minton, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. That's been our show. Hope your team wins. And if they don't, well, it probably means they lost.